So, hi all, good afternoon, and welcome to the second ECR presentation of the academic year 2022-23. My name is T.V. Singh, and I am Chief Computational Scientist at Office of Advanced Research Computing, or usually known as OARC. So, the topic of presentation is the understanding of scientific fields via network analysis and topic modeling, and it is by Dr. Harlin Lee. Before we start, let me introduce her. Dr. Lee is a Hedrick assistant and adjunct professor at UCLA mathematics. She received her PhD in electrical and computer engineering at Carnegie Mellon University in 2021. She also has an MS in machine learning from Carnegie Mellon University and a BS plus M engineering in electrical engineering and computer science from MIT. Her research is on learning from high-dimensional data supported on structures as graphs or networks, low-dimensional subspace or sparsity, motivated by applications in healthcare and social science. Dr. Lee's lifelong vision is to use data theory to help everyone live physically, mentally, socially, and maybe healthier. So without much ado, I invite Dr. Lee. Before we start, I am recording this presentation, and it will be made available at ECR website afterwards. And another thing is mute yourself when not talking. If you have any comments, questions, or feedback, please write it in the chat box. Either me or Lee will take those questions as time permits. So thank you again, and Dr. Lee.
Alrighty, thank you so much for the kind introduction and giving me this opportunity to talk today. So as a caveat, I want to say I am not a social scientist by training. I didn't really know much about this topic until I started working with Professor Jacob Foster in the sociology department last year. So I'm hoping that this topic will be interesting and new for you guys. And I am trying to keep this talk less about methods and math, but more about motivation behind the problem and implications and what you might want to study on later on. Okay. So let's get started. So there's this field in computational sociology called science of science. Very cool name, I should say. So what it does is it turns the lens of science onto itself, and it tries to understand interactions between scientific agents using quantitative measurements, which differs from typical sociology where they mostly rely on qualitative measurements. And the goal is to develop tools and policies that can accelerate scientific progress and innovation. So when I say scientific agents, what do you think of? Who do you consider as active members of science? Anyone?
Researchers.
Researchers.
Yeah, researchers, grad students. Yeah, synonymous. So yeah, thank you. So we would probably think of researchers, scientists like this, right? But actually, scientific agents can include non-humans. It can include scientific institutions like UCLA, or on a more granular level like IDRE or ECR group. It can also include scientific journals or conferences, the venues where publications happen. And there are, of course, the papers itself. You can even go on a more abstract level and consider scientific ideas and methods and theories and concepts as scientific agents as well, because all of these come together to make scientific progress happen. So I promised to talk about network analysis and topic modeling regarding this field of science. So what would networks or graphs look like in this field? Well, I mentioned all these different scientific agents. So if they are nodes in the graph, then they have these relationships that might be collaborations between scientists and institutions. Maybe there's a connection between a person and a paper because the person wrote the paper. Or between papers, there are relationships like citations. Between institutions, there's funding relationships like who got which grant. And then between different people and different institutions, you can label it relationships between them about academic degrees, advising, mentorship. And then on the abstract ideas, maybe you can have a relationship between ideas on how close they are. And maybe there's a hierarchical order to different ideas, like this mathematical statement implies next mathematical statement, and together they imply this famous theorem. So the idea I want to share here is I would argue that graphs and networks, you have nodes and edges that connect different nodes together. That is one of the intuitive ways to model these kind of relationships between scientific agents. And in particular, for today, I'm going to discuss citation networks and networks that come from related ideas. So those are the two I'm going to mention today. A specific research question that I want to talk about that brings together these different projects together is this idea of who should be collaborating. So as you all know, we have this overflow of information in the scientific field. So there's just no way researchers can familiarize themselves with the entirety of the scientific literature out there. We just cannot know everything that's out there. And what this leads to is it forces people to specialize in very narrow subdisciplines and just focus on that very thin sliver in the pie chart of that field that they're working on. And the problem is it makes people exist in bubbles or silos without talking to each other. And this can make it very challenging to discover new scientific concepts and bring about true innovations in science, which often comes from making surprising connections and talking to people outside of your field and making connections in that way. So that's the problem that I am interested in. And the tools that I want to talk about are network analysis based on the network that models relationships between these scientific agents, like I just mentioned, and also this idea of topic modeling and analyzing text data that we have from scientific publications. I guess three ideas that I have about who should be collaborating are these three. First, maybe communities who study similar topics, but don't cite each other or publish in the same venues. Maybe they are people who should be talking to each other more. Another idea is maybe we should look into which topics will be studied together soon or not soon. And this means that we should encourage people to make more surprising connections. And then the last one is more work in progress, but that's behind the idea of which collaborations would be more surprising. And hopefully that can lead to more surprising innovations. All right, okay, so, oh yeah, and then the overall goal of this is if we can figure out who should be collaborating that but are not in the moment, then we can develop a tool that offers, meaningful, personalized scientific ideas that can be very helpful for scientists, especially young scientists who are trying to understand the scientific field and define the research problems that they're interested in. And of course, ultimately, the entire society will benefit from such scientific progress. Okay, so part one, we looked into the field of cognitive science, mainly because it's an inherently and purposefully interdisciplinary field. And there's this paper on Nature Human Behavior called What Happened to Cognitive Science in 2019, which claimed that cognitive science, at least the modern cognitive science starting 1950s, was a field designed to integrate these 6 different fields like philosophy, psychology, computer science, neuroscience, anthropology, linguistics. And over time, it hasn't quite reached that goal of true integration between these 6 disciplines. And what ended up happening was like 2, I think psychology and computer science kind of dominated the field. And everything is kind of working on its own without true like merging of ideas. So that inspired me to look into this field, because this means that maybe there are more collaboration opportunities that are being missed right now. So this project worked on, had 2 parallel works. So one was we made a citation network and then did some network analysis, mainly in forming clusters. And then we also analyzed the abstracts of the papers, text analysis, and then formed topic clusters. And we did a comparison between these 2 different sets of communities to talk about what different informations are we getting from the network versus the text, because they embed different information. So this is the only mathy part of this, so please don't be scared. So the first part is we need to create some sort of network, and that is citation networks. So in this sense, each node corresponds to a paper in cognitive science that we got from Microsoft Academic Graph. And we form directed edges between these nodes, in that if paper I cites paper J, then there is a edge going in that direction. Otherwise, there is no edge. And then we isolated the largest connected component for easy analysis. So this is the most naive way to model the data, citation data that we have into a network in this directed graph. But we wanted to end up doing community detection or clustering of the nodes on this network. And because there are more well-established clustering methods for undirected networks, we decided to turn this network into something undirected, meaning instead of edges going from one place to another, there's no direction in those edges. So to do this symmetrization, of course, the most naive approach would be just to say, if there's an edge going from I to J, then make it so that the node, there's also an edge going from J to I. Well, that is totally fine approach for a lot of different problems, but in this case, it's not the best approach. So here's one counterexample, let's say, or a motivating example for why you might not want to do this naive symmetrization of the network. So in this case, we have 8 nodes, and all of the edges are going from 1, 2, 3 to 4, 5, and then 4, 5 are all pointing to 6, 7, 8. So as humans, when we look at this diagram, we feel like naturally there's a cluster of these nodes in the middle. Like we immediately see a pattern here and see that nodes 4 and 5 have very similar edge movement, I guess. And that if we were to group them into community, I would group these guys, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but 1, 2, 3 into one cluster, 4, 5 into one cluster, and 6, 7, 8 into one cluster. But if we do this naive method of turning directed edges into undirected edges, there's absolutely no way a clustering method will connect 4 and 5 together, because there's nothing that is directly connecting 4 and 5 to each other. It's just a matter, it's just that the patterns of edges going in and out are similar to each other. So in order to, actually, let me mention that. And you can see that this would be very important in citation networks, because if there are a group of papers that cite the same papers and are cited by the same papers, then naturally this group of papers should belong to a group, and any quantitative computational algorithm should be able to detect that. So people have come up with ways to account for this called bibliometric symmetrization, which does exactly what I just talked about, in that it tries to find patterns in similarity in patterns of edges coming in and edges coming out, instead of just looking at which nodes are connected by an edge right now. So mathematically, this actually turns out to be pretty easy to do. You can do very simple matrix calculations to the adjacency matrix to get another one that gives the number of nodes that I and J both point to, or that point to both I and J. That's a bit of a mouthful. And then you can come up with a adjacency matrix that is symmetrized, but doesn't encounter the same problem as this naive approach. Okay. I don't want to dwell too much on this detail, but that's the high-level idea. And then one more thing is, you can imagine that if you just think about how many in-links or in-edges and out-links are shared, if you have hubs in the network, nodes that just have a lot of edges, then just by the virtue of having a lot of edges, it's going to come up as connected to lots of different nodes. So an additional thing we did was we had to account for that degree distribution. And that also turned out to be very simple matrix calculations. So all of this methods, it's on this paper. Okay, so so now we have our undirected network where each node is a paper and the connections indicate similarity and citation patterns. So now we want to find clusters or communities or groups of these nodes. And what we did was use this method called Louvain's method that maximizes something called modularity. So for a given community structure or clustering scheme and a network, you can calculate something called modularity. It's one measure of fitness of how well this community structure describes the network topology. And just on a high level, what it means is if something has high modularity, then that means that there are more edges within each cluster. So there are more edges connecting these red nodes, more edges connecting these yellow nodes, and blue nodes, and so on. And there are way fewer edges that connect different clusters. And that is a natural way of understanding grouping in networks, I would say. So if papers cite each other a lot, then they should be grouped into the same community. All right, so that was a lot of the network analysis we've done with the citation network. And let me move on to what we did with the abstract text processing data. So the goal is to figure out topics that are present in the abstracts. But first, we need to turn the text data into a bunch of numbers, because computers don't really understand text. They only know numbers. So to fit any kind of prediction model into it, we need to turn it into a set of zeros and ones. And that's exactly what we did with Bagel Words model. So in case you're not familiar with this yet, all this does is, given a piece of text, then you just count how many times each word appears. So this is telling me that in this text, the word it appears 6 times, I appears 5 times, the appears 4 times, and so on. So this is just one of the many ways to map a piece of text into a vector space. And you can think of each word as a dimension in that vector space, if that makes sense. So once you do this, we applied something called non-negative matrix factorization to get the topics itself. So this X matrix is exactly what happens from bag of words model. So what this is we have n papers or paper abstracts equivalently, and each of the row corresponds to a dimension represented by each of the word. So these would have a bunch of integers and then weighted using something called TF-IDF that represents how many each words appear in each papers. And the idea is, of course, the underlying assumption here is that if the same words appear in 2 different papers, then they are likely to be talking about similar ideas. Okay. What this non-negative matrix factorization does is it approximates this matrix X as a product of 2 low-rank matrices, W and H. And the first one is a dictionary matrix or a topic matrix. And now we have words by topic. So this tells us for each of the R topics, how much does each of the words contribute? So for example, if I have, you might see that the first topic has a lot of contribution from words like brain and neuron, and based on that, you might be able to interpret, oh, topic 1 corresponds to neuroscience or brain related topics. And then the second matrix is for each topic, for each paper, what are the contributions of the topic? So together, we're able to say, okay, so given this one paper, I can take a look at this column value, and it tells me that this paper consists of 40% topic 1, it's 20% topic 2, 10% topic 3, and so on. And then looking at this first matrix, you're able to say, oh, topic 1 consists of 50% the word heart, and then 20% the word cardiovascular, and that way you're able to interpret what is happening in each of the papers. Okay, so this part is topic modeling. Now just take a look at what the results looked like. We did this in a hierarchical manner, so we had 2 levels of topics. So when we did this on the abstracts, we found that one popular topic, okay, so I don't know if you can zoom in, but you can see that there's one topic that is represented by the words visual object representation. So that sounds like vision related topics. Another one, cognitive cognition process, human social behavior, which sounds kind of like sociology aspect of it. And then there's one in this lilac color, that's linguistic communication. So that we think corresponds to the linguistics branch of cognitive science, and so on. And then what we did was, well, within papers that mostly talk about brain network and function topics, can we do this topic modeling process again with this non-negative matrix factorization, and look at what the subtopics are. So in this example, we have this big topic, brain network function, and then we have these subtopics that corresponds to different ideas. Okay. And very interesting conclusion that we drew was now we have this network clusters, and then we have assigned topic to each of these papers. So we're able to come up with topic distribution of these paper clusters. So this is a, so here I'm looking at 2 topic distributions for 2 clusters that were formed on the network. And you can see that these 2 communities in particular, 4 and 8, they talk about very similar topics. They talk about a lot of some combination of memory and visual and brain network. So these groups of papers are talking to each other, these groups of papers are talking about very similar topics, but the fact that they are different communities indicate that they're not citing each other a lot. So we dug into more of the metadata that the publications have and found that they also publish in very different journals. So community 4 publishes in a lot of psychology or specifically educational psychology papers, whereas community 8 publishes in neuroscience or more biology journals. So the idea that we had was, okay, I think we can conclude that there are groups of scientists in the cognitive science field, which is highly interdisciplinary, where they talk about very similar topics like memory and visual and brain, very complex topics, but they don't cite each other or publish in the same journals. So they don't have a venue to interact with each other. And that's a bit of a missed opportunity for collaboration because these complex topics like memory, maybe by talking to people from more biology side or more psychology side, you're able to get a more comprehensive understanding of these topics and be able to come up with new, fresh perspectives. So concluding this part, I just want to give a shout out to the RU students who were the ones who actually worked on this project. Okay, let me switch gears a little bit and then talk about this other part where the hypothesis was people who should be collaborating, maybe it depends on which topics are likely to be studied together soon. So in this case, what we studied is this field of machine learning and AI. And I'm sure you know that there is an abundance of papers. In fact, I think the number of papers on the preprint server archive doubles every 23 months, which is ridiculous speed. So there's absolutely no way someone can read all the papers that are out there. So it's even more relevant that we develop some sort of tool that that can understand these different ideas and the connections that we're missing out on. So to address this issue, there was this competition that was held as part of IEEE Big Data Conference. And the network we were given for this competition was a semantic network. So earlier we had a citation network where each node corresponded to a paper and edges were citations. In this case, each node corresponds to a concept or a keyword or an idea in the field of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So here's a very, very small subset of the network. So there are nodes that correspond to keywords like classification performance, document classification, benchmark data set, and so on. And the edges between 2 nodes happen if they both appear in the same scientific paper. So if I wrote a paper that mentions these 2 concepts together, classification performance and semantic relation, then that would show up as an edge in this semantic network. And each of these edges would have timestamps in units of days because these scientific papers have timestamps. So the goal of this project was to say, given 2 nodes that are not connected in 2017, can we predict whether it will be connected in 2020? So can we predict the likelihood of two concepts that have not been investigated together in the same context before? How likely are they to be investigated together in the future? So this would be, predicting future connections in machine learning. It would be valuable for young researchers starting out in the field, or funding agencies who are interested in knowing what which projects to focus on. So because this was for a competition, the given graph had only, we only had the nodes and edges and the timestamps. We didn't have the corresponding keywords to understand, is this a node that corresponds to deep learning? Well, we don't know because we don't have the labels. So because all we had was this set of informations, the hypothesis that we came up with was that, okay, so the connection or the adjacency matrix of the graph is important, and so are the dynamics of the adjacency matrix through time. So we should be able to extract some temporal information from this data set, and that has to be useful for making these predictions. To do that, we utilized something called node embedding. So the specific algorithm we used was node-to-vec. And what it does is this: it learns a map from the node to a vector space. So as you all know, graphs and networks, they don't really have a spatial information. It's just a matter of, it's just a set of nodes and a set of edges. But based on the connectivity of the graph, there are many algorithms out there that can embed each node into a point in a vector space. And the idea is that by doing this, then you can leverage all sorts of models out there that can use Euclidean data for data points that exist in vector space. So what we did was dynamic node embedding, meaning given this data graph, we took snapshots of the graph at each year. So we had 1994 graph, 1995 graph, all the way to 2016, 2017. Oh, whoops. And then for each of these graphs, we applied node-to-vec algorithm. And on a high level, what node-to-vec does is it takes biased random walks on the network and embed them using some algorithm called skipgram. And the idea is that there are very well-established methods for embedding word into vector space. So it leverages those algorithms called word-to-vec. And word-to-vec, what it does is use the very intuitive idea that words that appear in similar sentences in similar context should have similar embeddings in the vector space. And very similarly, what this does is say that nodes that appear in the same random walks or similar random walks, they should also be mapped to similar embeddings. Without getting into too much detail, that's the idea. So once we did this, what we had was we had access to a time series data for each node. Specifically for each node, we had 24 snapshots of 128 dimensional vectors. And at this point, now that we have this temporal information, we were able to leverage a lot of existing machine learning models that is able to learn dynamics of these vectors. In particular, we use something called transformers, which is a very popular neural network architecture that has seen very high, very strong performance in natural language processing, like machine translation or speech recognition. So the idea was, okay, we will use this transformers architecture, pretend like these data are text data, and learn how they change over time. And hopefully that would allow us to make predictions about edges that will be formed in the future. So to conclude, what we got was, we had this AUC of 0.85, which is not bad. But I'm kind of excited to say that our method was not the best. Like, we won special prize in this competition, but we didn't win the whole thing, because methods that used carefully curated network features actually worked a lot better, that are more grounded in graph theory, that looks at how many nodes are shared between, how many neighbors are shared between nodes, and how many hops away are they from each other, and etc. Things that people have studied a lot in classical graph theory. And the reason I'm excited that ours didn't win the competition is because then this means that there's a lot of room for improvement in using more machine learning and data-driven approaches to predict the future of machine learning. So if you're interested in this topic, we have published the data set that we worked on with a lot of benchmark models. It's all public on GitHub. So you should tackle it and see if you can come up with a better machine learning model that can predict the future of machine learning. So in about 3 minutes, I want to briefly mention this ongoing project that's, honestly, I'm still kind of brainstorming, and I'm hoping that you guys will help me come up with better ideas. So one of the key ideas for that second project was the idea of node embedding, right? And the reason why node embedding became so popular was because of word embedding. And the promise that it gave us was that once these words are mapped to a vector space, then you can understand the relationships between these between these words by looking at the relationship between these vectors. So that's why word embedding was so popular and had so much potential. So the idea I have is, okay, well, can we come up with better graph embedding methods? Sorry. Oh yeah, I was getting questions. Okay, I can answer those later. Yeah. So yes, okay. So the idea is, if we have these graphs of all the different scientific agents and that are connected by edges that correspond to papers. Sorry. So earlier we were talking about, well, in this graph, nodes are papers and the edges are citations. And then we had another one that was nodes or ideas or concepts, and then edges are if they appear together on a scientific paper. So the idea of this project is, can we put all of these different scientific agents together in one graph? So maybe this node corresponds to me, the scientist, and then this node corresponds to the institution UCLA. This one corresponds to funding agency NSF. And then we are all connected by this hyperedge, which can connect multiple nodes at a time, because of this one paper that I wrote together. And given this hypergraph, can we embed them into a vector space, kind of like here, such that we can reason about the relationships between different scientists, different institutions, me, like, how can I calculate distance between me and the Euler's formula, And the goal of that is have this model, map it into vector space, and then we might be able to figure out when are the more surprising collaborations happening, with the hope that then maybe we should encourage people to connect more if they are farther apart, because then they will need external motivation to talk to each other. So this is very much on the brainstorming phase. I would love to talk to you about it if you're a hypergraph expert. And in conclusion, I just want to reiterate that all of this project in Science of Science was centered around this idea of who should be collaborating. We used methods from network analysis and natural language processing, and specifically topic modeling. And the three hypotheses that I had was, well, people who study similar topics but don't cite each other or publish in the same venues, maybe they should be collaborating with each other. The other one is if we can figure out which topics will be studied together soon, maybe we can encourage them, or maybe we should be encouraging people who collaborations between topics that aren't going to happen soon. Like maybe they need more of a push. And then lastly, which collaborations would be more surprising? And hopefully this idea of hypergraph embedding can help us get closer to that goal. All right, thank you so much. 40 minutes. And I'm happy to take any questions.
So there are a few questions on the chat.
Yeah. Okay. Grad students, postdocs. Let's see. Okay, so Benjamin wrote, for published articles, authors choose lists of keywords to include in the publication. How much overlap do you find between your identified topics' prevalent words versus the keywords that authors self-select? Oh, that is a very interesting question that I haven't investigated. Let's see. Yeah, so I would assume that they contain very similar information, the topics that authors choose to include, the keywords, and the keywords that correspond to the paper topic that are more learned from the rest of the data. But I think there's a slight difference here in that the keywords that authors make are going to be for their specific paper, whereas using topic modeling, we end up having, each paper ends up having a distribution of topic, in that it ends up having here. Oh yeah, okay, I guess you get something like this, in that one paper, instead of corresponding to just one topic, in reality, you get something that's 40% topic one represented by these keywords, 20% topic two represented by these other set of keywords. So I think it will, doing topic modeling lets you know a little bit more of an information, contains a little bit more information than just looking at the keywords that the authors give. But I would assume there's a huge overlap. I just haven't looked at it myself. Yeah. How computationally intensive was working with the data sets for this project? The first one, not so much, because we had, well, first of all, it's because a lot of the undergrads did the project. So we started off with maybe 250,000 cognitive science papers. And then we had to do a lot of pre-processing to make sure they have quality abstracts and some good citation information. So it narrowed it down to maybe something like 60,000 papers. And that was not very computationally intensive. Things like non-negative matrix factorization, you're able to do it on Google Colab easily. Part two, however, with 64,000 nodes and I want to say 12 million edges, that was very computationally expensive. And I had to leverage a lot of GPUs on clusters to do that. Yeah, so I would say the main challenge of this project was the computation aspect. Do I have a tool or script that can readily run? Can I remove nodes? Are you talking about this guy? This second project?
Vishnu, please unmute yourself and you can answer the question.
Hello, Lee. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm working in Alzheimer's and there are like thousands of papers. So I want to find the relations of how many. So I want to do a molecular search and I want to filter the papers who are interested in a particular set of molecules. So how do I start with?
Can you repeat your question one more time, sorry?
So when you are running this project, so you run in a tool that can I readily use it to find the nodes for each different topics in the Alzheimer's, for example?
Yeah, I think those, so the data set given to us, that was given by the competition organizers, and they used a existing algorithm called rake, I want to say, that looks through a bunch of text and extracts keywords from them. So that should be a tool that you can readily use on a different set of publications to get keywords from it.
Okay.
Yeah, something, perhaps taking a look at this archive paper. That might explain how the keywords came about a little bit better.
Okay, so on top of that, can you go to the part one where you have
Where
the previous slides? So yeah, so can I do this kind of a grouping once I get the data set?
Yeah. This is a very classical method. So there are many existing implementations out there in Python, C++, different code.
Okay, can you recommend me something that you are confident of?
Yeah, sure. I can send you an email if you send me an email, I can.
Yeah, I'll send you an email. Yeah, thank you very much.
There is a big comment, I think, from Christina.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree with this comment. Yeah. Okay. And then I think I just got one from Tom. Many now just do word searches across narratives and interview data sets to find clusters and use for coding. Have you compared this to topic modeling, and is TM going to be available for us to use directly with current software? I think that's maybe similar to the first question from Benjamin, I wonder. If please correct me if I'm understanding this wrong, but the idea of doing this topic modeling versus doing keyword search. And I haven't done comparison, but I would assume that doing topic modeling gives you a little bit more information, or like slightly different information, and that gives you a distribution of topics. And yeah, so the non-negative matrix factorization, that's one of the most common ways of doing it. So it's so that's like a very well established thing. You can, like, if you're familiar with Python, using Python for data science, then it exists in scikit-learn package. You can just import it and run it. There are a lot more complicated topic modeling methods out there, like LDA. And I think someone from Jacob Foster's group came up with a more cool idea that called like data atoms. If you email me, I can send you more cool topic modeling papers that are like available for you to use directly. Yeah. So my contribution here wasn't really like coming up with new mathematical methods. It was more combining different existing methods to analyze large quantities of data, exactly like Christina mentioned. Yeah.
Any more questions? Please raise your hand and you can ask it directly. If not, let me ask one question.
Yeah.
So many of these terminologies in different disciplines of the sciences, they are different in their disciplines. Like same one name has a different it is called different in one discipline than the other one, and there are many situations like that. So I think that might be a challenge in this kind of analysis.
Yeah, so that's something that was interesting. So that's one of the reasons people found the word embedding method very interesting, because if these embedding methods are able to say words that appear in similar context are mapped to a similar place, then it should be able to automatically understand that even though in this paper it uses the word clustering, and this paper uses the word community detection, because it's surrounded by similar words and appear in similar ways, then it should be mapped to a similar place. Yeah, so that's definitely one of the challenges that people work with in text data.
Thank you. Any more questions? If not, let's thank Lee for the excellent talk. I hope you all enjoyed. Please feel free to, I'm assuming that Lee is okay with this. Feel free to contact her directly if you have further questions or need more about anything. So thank you again, and we have exciting agenda for the year in ECR presentations. So we will be announcing those as and when those are available. I hope you will join those. So thank you again.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lee.
Bye-bye.